afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you on this day to share our history. So we'll start right away. What? Can everyone get quiet, please? Thank you. We're going to start our presentations shortly, and I have one thing to request of all of you, that if you have questions, we will do them at the end of all the presentations, so we keep everything flowing, because we have a lot to talk about today, and it's great to see every one of you. Here we go, Tim.
Hello. In our previous 4 cemetery walks, 2 in Slatington, 1 at Frieden's, and 1 at Slade Ale, we asked for a representative from either the cemetery or the church, if that was involved, to do a brief history of the cemetery or the church. We were all raring to go here. Judy managed to line up Dave Hunziker to do it, and from what I knew of him, that was quite an honor, because he knew the history very well. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, his plans had changed, and he's going to be out of the area. So somehow or other I got selected to do the cemetery/church history. So here I am. Before I get started on the cemetery history, I'd like to share a real brief information that I found on the Heidelburg Township and on the character of the people here in Heidelburg Township. Until 1840, there were little mingling with other people, talking about the Pennsylvania Germans that were here at the time. Those who had possession of the land conveyed it from one heir to another, and thus kept it among the descendants. I don't know if that would fly in today's political scene or not, that you're keeping it all to yourself, but anyway, that's what they did. That's what our ancestors did in the area. Schools of the English language were scarce. Churches, both of the German Reformed and Lutheran denominations, were found all over the county and were well attended. There were strict adherence to the doctrine of the churches. The parents greatly desired having their children trained in the precepts of Christianity. It was rare for a stranger to settle among them. Sorry. Trade was carried by wagons to Philly and other markets. Stores had their supplies brought all the way from Philadelphia, a distance of 80 miles. So that tells you a little bit about puts it in the mood a little bit for the character of the people back in the 1700s that settled here. A little bit about the township. The first settlements were made in 1735. The number of the first immigrants was small, consisting of isolated families who had come from Switzerland and Germany. Their names have been preserved and show that they were from one common general neighborhood. But the name of the place was unfortunately forgotten. The first company of settlers formed the foundations of succeeding congregations, and at once staked off the land they intended to use for church and school purposes. They called it the Hill of Zion, and gave their descendants the solemn injunction that they should not rest until they had obtained lawful possession of the same through a warrant. Any of you that have done historical research and that know that you've run across warrants. There's a list for county warrants. You would think in that day and age that you wouldn't be that precise for dimensions and property ownership and that. But they were, obviously. Okay, I was going to talk about the church, but I think there's been so much written about the church. And boy, any of you guys and gals that are members here, really, what is it, in 17 years, you will be celebrating, what, 300 years? I think that's just unfathomable to think that there's ancestors here. Our ancestors have been around here for 300 years. But, okay, now we're going to go to the cemetery, which is what we're here for. This information I'm going to share with you about the cemetery I got from the guru of Heidelburg Township, the historical guru, Raymond Hollenbach. I don't know if any of you get into history and that, but I'll never forget, well, I don't know, must have been back in 1980s or something like that, 70s, we were doing my wife's family history, and we came across this name, Raymond Hollenbach, and we went down to visit him. I think he lived in Royersford, that's down on Route 29. And here's this old guy with books and a typewriter and all kinds of records and information. And subsequently, we found out a lot about the families here. We found out about my wife's family, and we found out he wrote a book. I know we have it on the shelf at home, one of the celebration books and so forth. So this is from Hollenbach. This is his writings here in about the cemetery. 1959. This is when he wrote this article about the Heidelburg Cemetery. The first road into the area of Heidelburg Church was surveyed in 1753. Local roads were woodland paths. Most of the township roads were not officially surveyed until after 1800. In 1758, when a census was taken for military purposes, there were only 11 wagons in all of what is now Heidelburg, which included at that time Washington Township. Under these conditions, it is not likely that the bodies of the deceased were all buried at the church in the early days. In fact, it is doubtful that a graveyard was established before about the time the second church was built in 1757. The first record of a funeral in Heidelburg is that of Elizabeth Rader, in 1753. But the record does not definitely state that the burial was at the church. The oldest gravestone at Heidelburg with legible inscriptions, there's two of them for the same year. One of them, Anna Kraus, and another, same year, for John Giltner. This is, you can go out here if you're interested sometime and you can see Anna Kraus's tombstone. This is what it looks like. It's about yay wide and about yay high, and I don't know if it's sandstone or what kind of material that would be qualified as, but she's right out here. I scraped some of the moss off of it so you can see it a little better right now. Right aside of her, and it almost looks like an identical stone, is this other fella in 1760 also, John Giltner. So anyway, she's the oldest, that's the farthest away date that someone died buried here on the cemetery. That's still standing. There are at the present time in Heidelburg no private burial grounds, but there are records that 3 such burial places existed. One of the Huffman family. I'm talking about the private burial ground. Now we're away from the cemetery where people had their own cemeteries in their own backyards or woods or whatever. Okay. One was the Huffman family along the Pleasant Corner, Schnecksville Road. Another on the Rex Homestead, which is down in Washington Township. And a third of the Kern family going in towards Slatington in Washington Township along Trot Creek. There were undoubtedly many burials on homesteads in the earliest days, but all are unmarked graves. The old burial ground near the church is approximately rectangular in shape. It's about 200 foot long, 100 foot wide, and there are 19 rows of graves, some which do not have a single marker on the row. There are approximately 500 graves that they have records in the church that there's 500 burials there, but there's only 104 stones left. So those other 400 stones got knocked over, hauled, whatever, or got covered over. Neither congregation has any written burial record. The only early records of burials is that by Reverend Helfrich, Johannes Helfrich, for the year 1790 to 94. And he goes into that. Okay. In 1832, nearly all of the space in the old graveyard was filled up. And the congregations held an election to choose a new site. 3 sites were proposed, but the site selected along the road leading to what is now Slatington was chosen, which is right where it is. Okay. When this area was used up, the graveyard was extended and upwards up the hill. We have done, this is our 5th cemetery. And there's only one thing about exploring the cemeteries when you get a little bit older. Why did they build them on the hillside? Oh, to have Slate Hill, I love you, I love you, I love you. But these others, this was great down here. You know, our 1750 ancestors, they knew what they were doing. The rest of them, backwards up the hill. This was done about 1860. The lot cemetery with family plots was opened in 1869. These states, however, do not limit the dates of burials in the various places. The last burial made in the oldest graveyard near the church was 1874, and the second is still being used by families now for who they bury. I did notice something to finish off here. When I was out the other day and looking around at the graves and trying to read them, and how I would have liked to have had a Breidinger or a Frau Hicks or somebody like that around as I'm trying to read out this old German. But I did notice something about, which I never even thought of, about the types of tombstones. If you look at the old cemetery, I took a photo. A lot of the tombstones look like this. Now, not all of them out here, but I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe 25, 30% look like this. And this is out front. This is I call these the Peters row. There's about 4 Peters right out in the front out here like this. And as you go back though, there's more like this, shaped like this, and then there's I call this the king size, and then there's some about 3/4 that big, and then there's some only that big, but they all have that same common shape, which I guess sometime I ought to research and find out what that was all about, because, okay, here's I stepped back and took a picture. You can see the shape of them in the front that I just showed you, the single one. But as you go back, you can see more of them. Small. Now you might say, oh, they're not smaller, Tim, you're just farther away. No, but they are smaller. I walked back to them. The next most prevalent tombstone are these little half round, like saints. I'm calling it sandstone. If I have the material wrong, at the end you can correct me, because I like to know anyway. But this is what I took a close-up of one of them. They're right up front of one of those brown stones, whatever. And you have to be careful cleaning. I've been cleaning stones at other cemeteries, and you sure don't want to become nothing metal. No way metal, because these stones, unless they're granite, these stones are soft. Even marble is soft. So you don't want to touch with metal. You want to touch. I use a scrub brush or just a rag or something. And I use some cleaners. But these stones are hard to clean. These brown ones. I tried to clean that one, and I wasn't too successful. Okay. Now, when we jump over to the second cemetery, you don't see hardly any of those stones. This is what you see. I don't know why. This side of the church had that time. This is what you see predominantly. When you look down when you go up the road, look down. That's what you'll see like that. I don't know why. And then, of course, as you go up the hill, and then we get into more or less a modern era where we have all kinds of shapes and sizes, and predominantly we go to granite, which is the harder material and lasts the longest and so forth. I just want to say that I'm done with the cemetery. It really made me feel good to come out here, and I'm not a member of the church. I didn't grow up in Heidelberg. My wife did. But I am Pennsylvania Dutch, Schneider. And all I had in my mind in Slatington was the Welsh and some Pennsylvania, the Kern gang and that in Slatington, and up on Slatington. Now we get to the real heart of the matter. This is where it all started, out here. Of course, it started in Germany and Switzerland, but after that, here. So that is a little bit of an introduction to the cemetery. And now Judy's going to talk about the German family.
Can I just hold it?
Huh?
Can I just hold it?
I don't know.
Robert, can I just hold? Great. Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about Adam German. Adam German was born in Kleingumpen in 1746. He was the 4th child of Heinrich and Katrina Rausch. Kleingumpen is in the Odenwald, and the Odenwald is a forested area with narrow valleys and steep slopes. And of course, the reason they came over here was because the land in the Odenwald wasn't very successful anymore. There was too many people coming there, and there wasn't enough cultivated land to grow their crops. One thing I found interesting when I was researching what kind of crops they grew over there, they didn't grow corn until the mid-1700s. Why, I don't know. I didn't find that out yet with my research, but hopefully one day I will. No, it wasn't corn, it was potatoes. And I thought, oh my goodness, Grünbad and Kartoffeln, I would be at a loss because I love potatoes. But anyhow, the Odenwald area is near in the southwestern part of Germany. It is within easy reach of Frankfurt to the north and to the south Heidelberg. Now, the farms in the village of in the Odenwald are located in the village, and the land is outside of the village, like separated between two plots, and it's within easy walking distance of the farm. And it just so happens that my homestead, the German homestead, is still in the Odenwald, and it's been there for 250 years, die Freundschaft. And the fellow who lives in there is Heinz Kaufenberger, and he is very, very receptive to people visiting the farm. So if any of you ever would want to go there and see the farm, you just call Judy Snyder, and I'll set it up with Heinz Kaufenberger, and he'll gladly give you a tour. It's a beautiful area, like I said. And he was here 15 years ago. And he wanted to, he does have a farm. He still farms. His son has the farm now. He lived with his parents on the farm. And it just so happens that my side of the Germans is very, very close. And maybe that's why they're so close, because it all started in the Odenwald, and it just kept trickling down until this generation, where our families are scattered now, more all over the country. We're no longer in one area where we're living. But he lived there with his father, and he came here 15 years ago. He also worked for the United States Army. He just retired. And we showed him Germansville, the area, and he was impressed with it. He said it's similar to the Odenwald. Well, it is similar, but it's still a little different. And of course, we have a lot more land here around here than they do in the Odenwald, because it's a bigger area. But anyhow, like I said, if you're interested in going there, he would be more than happy to show you the farm, give you a tour. So Adam arrived here on the ship in 1764, and he was the fourth child of Henry and Katrina Rausch. And then his brother came over here in 1771, Conrad. But Conrad didn't live long here. He only lived here about 3 years, and then I think his wife died. I don't know the reason why he died. We couldn't find that out. But Adam did marry a Peter, Eva and Elizabeth Peter. She was the daughter of Jacob Peter. And they had 11 children, and 8 of the children are buried over here on this cemetery. They were members of this church, and they were christened here, some of them. So you can see I'm really deeply rooted, and maybe that's one reason why I never wanted to leave this area. And I am from one of the children, Philip, and I want to pay particular attention to this. I brought this here today, it's a POSA order camp. My grandfather was a member there, and perhaps some of you have seen this. It was in the Sagersville area, which is nearby here, and that's why I thought you should see that. I had never seen it before. I did a little research, but I want to do some more research on it. I think it's very interesting. From all my history visits and that, I've never seen anything like that, all the documents. Laying there, too, is a map of the Odenwald. It'll show you that. And then there's a Stammbaum. That shows you where Adam came from. It's in German. I got it over in Darmstadt when I was there doing research. And there's also, I don't forget that's there, and the map. Oh, and the paper tells you what those scenes are on the camp paper. I'd appreciate if you take a look at that, because I've never seen any of that in my life. Maybe some of you here have, who are living from this area, know about it, about the POs of A's. As a matter of fact, the POs of A's, there's only 14 left, and they're all in the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 14. And also, when these camps were formed, Pennsylvania still had the most camps formed. Now, like I said, 8 of the children are buried over here. Now, John and Conrad went to Seneca County, Ohio. We were there. We took pictures of their graves. And out there, they changed the name from German to Gumman. And that's because we Pennsylvania Germans say, when they used to say Gummansville, they didn't say Germansville. And that's why they changed it, because of the German pronunciation, Gumman. Now, also, Jacob Peter, in his will, because Adam was married to his daughter, he had a grist mill, and in there he willed the grist mill to Adam. Now, where that mill was actually located on the Jordan Creek, I'm not certain of where it is. But we do know one thing, that it was first.
Welcome everyone, and thank you again for coming. I'm here to share with you some historical information about the Handwerk family, who were very early settlers of the Heidelburg Township region. I'll ask for your forgiveness in advance, as I have a limited amount of time to share with an oral history on such a large and prominent family. I'm sure many of you in attendance can certainly share more information and direct knowledge of the family. However, I come to you with a love of history, an exploration of the family whose hard work, traditional cultures, perseverance, and ingenuity laid the foundation for the area in which I call my home. The Handwerk family is a very large family with many descendants in this area, many of which either settled on the original homestead or chose to place permanent roots in the surrounding Slatington area. The early settlers upon whom my research is based were a typical immigrant family whose moral values encompassed God, family, community service, a love of country, and a love of the land. Early settlers were said to come from the Palestine region of Germany, and this is in the southern or the Rhine region, and were notated to be farming people, as described in a historical publication of the Lehigh County area. The Handwerk pioneers, as commemorated by a monument stone, list family members Heinrich, Nicholas, Peter, Jacob, Johannes, and Anna Maria Lenz, settling in the Heidelburg region beginning in the year 1739 through 1740. Johannes is said to have owned a huge tract of land, although I could not find an exact amount. Land warrants do show him selling 400 acres in November of 1761 to son John Handwerk and Nicholas Handwerk, Jr. Other Heidelburg Township records show land warrants from 57 acres to John Handwerk in November 1758, and then Nicholas for 110 acres in August of 1766. Township tax assessment records for 1781 list residents Peter, Jacob, Jacob Jr., John, and Frederick. Subsequently, federal tax records from the year 1790 list families Jacob, John, Peter, and Peter Jr. Between these families, there were a total of 28 children. Interestingly, an article from Ancestry.com of the Handwerk name indicates that in 1840 there were 14 Handwerk families living in Pennsylvania, and this represented 100% of the recorded Handwerks in all of the United States. The Handwerk family were of the Lutheran faith, as told in the history of the Heidelburg Church written by Reverend William Helfrich. Many of them were members of the Heidelburg Church. Johannes being an early member whose brown sandstone marker can be found in what is described as the old Heidelburg Church graveyard, along with his son Johannes, who is also buried there, who was born April 1st, 1742, and then died on September 13th, 1813. There are also tombstones for Catherine Handwerk, Peter Handwerk, and John Handwerk, to list a few of the many Handwerks who worship at the Heidelburg Church. The abundance of Handwerk descendants whose final resting place is within the Heidelburg Cemetery makes it clear that the family had great importance on faith and worship, and it was an integral part of the fabric of this family for many generations. Johannes erected a home on the homestead, and this is often referred to as the Heidelburg Stadt, and it was somewhere in between 1769, although I couldn't find an exact date because I saw some different ones. Very impressive is the dedication of the Handwerk family in keeping in touch with its ancestral roots. Eugene Handwerk organized the first family reunion in August of 1912. I came across an article in the Morning Call from August of 1982 regarding the family reunion, in which Slatington Mayor Paul Handwerk served as chairman of the Handwerk Family Reunion Committee. Over 100 family members were in attendance at this particular reunion, of which the average age of attendees was reported to be 35. Walter Handwerk, age 95, had the distinguished honor of being the oldest family member in attendance. August 2014 was the 100th family reunion, with about 130 in attendance. A quick search on Facebook reveals that the family reunions continue to this day. Love of the land runs deep in the roots of this family. In the same above article published by the Morning Call in 1982, it is mentioned that Clayton Handwerk is reported to be the oldest fully active farmer in the state of Pennsylvania at the age of 92, and is said to be the dean of the Lehigh County farmers. However, the contribution from this family is not only that of what can be harvested from the land. The handwork name is said to come from the meaning of working with hands, craft, or trade, depending on the source. And this holds true when history reflects that many worked in the trades as coopers, bricklayers, carpentry, wagon makers, or they worked in the slate factories or the textile trades. Service to our country was also of notable importance, as records show many have honorably served in our nation's military. As stewards to their community, they served the church as deacon, as elders, or as teachers or school directors, or held positions in the local government as township supervisors. Nathan Handwerk served the township as an assessor from 1880 to 1904, over 20 years. It was really interesting to note that for 6 of those terms, he held the distinguished honor of being unanimously elected by both political parties. So something we would never see today. I really found this little nugget of information profound, as surely this was a testament to the respect and integrity of the handwork name. I can only imagine the great fortitude and strength of these first pioneers, the hard work and struggles of farming life, compounded by the wars and the Industrial Revolution going on in the United States during that time. It is no wonder that these traits and long-established traditions are strongly carried on by family members over 280 years later. I enjoy delving into this family's history and their contributions. Thank you.
David Hunsicker was going to present the Hunsicker family history today, but unfortunately he is overseas, but was kind enough to share his remarks with us so that we can present them to you today. Johannes John Hunsicker had a rough start in life. According to Johannes's baptismal record, his father, Johannes Ulrich Hunsicker, was resident in the town of Schwalbach, historically the Alsace-Lorraine region of France. He died when Johannes was about a year old in 1722. His mother, Sarah Diller, subsequently remarried. So on September 15th, 1748, when Johannes landed in Philadelphia aboard the ship Two Brothers, he was accompanied by his 15-year-old half-brother, Johann Jacob Kennel/Kendall. His mother and stepfather, Joseph Kennel, arrived on the ship Brothers almost precisely 3 years later, on September 15th, 1751. By that time, Johannes Hunsicker had already started to establish himself in Heidelburg Township. It is not entirely clear precisely when Johannes Hunsicker moved into what is now Heidelburg Township, Lehigh County, after arriving in Philadelphia in 1748, but likely sometime around 1750. The area was originally part of Bucks County until Northampton County was formed from it in 1752. Lehigh County was not established as a separate county until 1812, after Johannes's death sometime in 1800. Johannes was a prominent citizen in Heidelburg Township and served on the General Committee of the Northampton County, representing the township in the lead-up to the American Revolution. In that role, he voted along with his other committeemen on May 30th, 1776, to approve a provincial convention to form a new government for Pennsylvania, which would in turn change Pennsylvania's representation at the Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia in the weeks to follow, and cement Pennsylvania's vote in favor of independence. Existing land records show that he and his sons were significant landowners immediately adjacent to Heidelberg church lands. According to Raymond Hollenbach in the 1978 History of Heidelburg Union Church, at one time this family owned all of the land on the 3 sides of the Heidelberg Church. His significant land holdings are clear from his will probated in December 1800, where he left parcels up to 150 acres to 6 of his 7 sons, totaling 1,290 acres. His third son, Johannes John Jr., was to inherit 200 acres, presumably including the areas where the Hunsicker/Reinert and Fink farms now stand, and extending into what is now Washington Township, which was carved out of Heidelberg in 1847. One of his sons, Johann Theobald de Walt Hunsicker, had migrated to Catawba County, North Carolina, and became the progenitor of the Hunsicker family, who still reside in that area, thus why his portion of the estate was held by trust by his brothers. A gravestone in his memory stands in St. John's Lutheran Church Cemetery in Conover, Catawba County, North Carolina. Caspar, Jacob, Heinrich/Henry, Joseph, and Johannes/John Jr.'s family would stay in Heidelburg Township, while the youngest, Peter, would settle in Lynn Township and is buried in the old part of the Ebenezer Church Cemetery. This location of the emigrant Johannes Hunsicker's grave is not known, nor is that of most of his sons who remained in the area. Only Peter's and Johannes' Jr. grave sites are known. Presumably, the others are buried on their respective farms, or possibly in the plots in the Heidelburg Cemetery that are no longer marked or were never marked with stones. Caspar's lands were in what was later become Washington Township, and many of the descendants of Caspar Jr. are buried in the Neff's Church, while others are buried at Heidelberg, including sons Joseph and Jonas, who rest at the front of the new or upper cemetery. Johannes Hunsicker's two daughters also married into what would become prominent Heidelberg families. Anna Marie married George Rex, and Magdalena married William Peter. Magdalena and her husband are buried in the old section of the Heidelberg Cemetery. Johannes John Jr. and his wife Katharina Ohl are buried right along Church Road in the old part of the Heidelberg Cemetery. Katharina was the daughter of Michael Ohl, who had also been an early member of the Heidelberg Church and prominent citizen in the township. According to the history of Lehigh County, they were the first to settle on farms where Sterling and Doreen Nee Hunsicker now reside. In his unpublished manuscript on the Hunsicker family of the Lehigh Valley, Raymond Hollenbach states that Johannes John Jr. was a farmer and lived on the original Hunsicker homestead near Sagersville, where Henry Hunsicker and his son Raymond Hunsicker lived in recent years. More on Henry and Raymond to come. In addition to 4 daughters, Johannes John Jr. had 2 sons, Johannes, who moved to Stony Run in Albany Township and is buried at Jerusalem, or the Red Church, predeceased his father and does not appear to have had any male progeny. And Heinrich, or Henry, inherited the original homestead from his father at his death in 1836. Heinrich Henry Hunsicker had 4 sons, Reuben, David, Edward, and Levi. Reuben moved to Albany Township, Berks County, near his cousins, and not much is known about Edward or his descendants. But David and Levi stayed close to home. According to Hollenbach, in 1849, Heinrich sold his son David, who was locally known as Reich Davy Hunsicker, or Rich Davy Hunsicker, part of the farm adjacent to the family home towards Heidelberg Church. And the history of Lehigh County continues to state that David built his house in 1850 and the barn in 1851. When David Hunsicker passed in 1904, his brother Levi, or Lafayette, who had inherited the family homestead from his father Heinrich, purchased his deceased brother's farm because David did not have any children. David is buried in an enclosed area in the upper front part of the new cemetery at Heidelberg. Levi had 3 children, Henry, Mary, and Sarah. Sarah was mentally disabled in some way and therefore was under the care of her brother and sister. Mary A.J. Hunsicker married Richard H. Fink in November 1898. Either through sale or inheritance, when Levi passed away in 1910, they received the former farm of David Hunsicker. The Hunsicker/Fink farm was then passed down to their son Henry and grandson Orrin and great-grandson David and his wife Sonia. The farm is well known in the area as Heidel Hollow Farm, with approximately 600 acres under cultivation. Heidel Hollow Farms is immediately to the northwest of the cemetery. Across the road from the Heidel Hollow Farm, the Levi Hunsicker farm was passed down to his son Henry and grandson Raymond, who in turn passed it on to his son Sterling Hunsicker. Sterling's daughter Doreen married Sterling Reinert, and they were sold the farm by Doreen's father. All of the generations between Johannes Jr. and Sterling are buried in the Heidelberg Cemetery. Many other descendants of Johannes Hunsicker are buried in the Heidelberg Cemetery and are spread across the Lehigh Valley as well. Among them were Charles O. Hunsicker, a descendant of Johannes' youngest son Peter, who was mayor of Allentown between 1909 and 1911, and Francis P. Hunsicker, born in Heidelburg Township in 1855, who was a cigar merchant who established his store in the Hunsicker building at 7th and Hamilton Streets in Allentown, which was an 11-story building considered one of Allentown's first skyscrapers. A more recent prominent descendant was Robert F. Hunsicker, who founded the Alpo Pet Food Company in 1936.
Do I have to introduce myself or anything? No. Okay. The Pennsylvania Dutch Way. According to Find a Grave, there are 53 Kraus burials on Heidelburg Union Cemetery. Background information: Johann Friedrich Kraus, spelled K-R-A-U-S, minus the what we normally see as K-R-A-U-S-E, was born September 1st, 1712, in Baden-Württemberg, Germany. His mother was Margaretha, his father was Leonard Kraus, born in 1671, and they immigrated to the United States. Do I have to start over? No. They immigrated to the United States, entering into Philadelphia in 1746. And those children were Johann George, 1752 to 1759, Johann Philip, 1753 to 1795, Anna Katharina, 1759 to 1760. And Heidelburg Cemetery is where the Kraus patriarch Johannes was buried, along with his son John Philip and his grandson Johannes Conrad. 4 more grandsons, George, Philip, Daniel, and Frederick, are also buried on the new cemetery opposite the church. John Philip died young, and the younger children were separated into foster care. Only Johannes Conrad was of an age to be able to take care of himself, and he also died young. The others lost contact with each other and also with their beginning roots. It was not until 1896 when the descendants of Frederick decided to have a reunion that they discovered their roots. A history committee found the patriarch's gravestones in Heidelberg Church's old cemetery. It was then decided to erect the obelisk and place it over the graves of Johannes and his daughter Susanna, who died young, and John Philip, the first son of Johannes Conrad, whose name is also on the obelisk. His stone is barely legible. On the opposite side of the obelisk is a granite stone placed in more modern times to Johannes Conrad, because it was erroneously believed that his original stone was destroyed. As the Kraus reunion historian, Gerald Straw, intended to have the stone removed to be placed in front of the original, but this has not yet happened. The obelisk has a date of 1904 as the date of its erection. On the back side is a genealogy of 4 generations that is quite accurate. Of all the grandsons, the only one not buried on Heidelberg Church is Adam. He died at the age of 48, and he was buried on his wife's family plot in Weisenberg's old graveyard in 1833. The largest number of Kraus descendants come from Johannes Conrad, and they have spread out across Heidelburg, Washington Township, and Slatington. Another branch was found in New Tripoli, but the 2 branches couldn't discover how they were related. They speculated that John Philip had another son they were unaware of. And this has not been discovered. The Kraus obelisk on the back is Daniel, 1788 to 1857, George, 1781 to 1776, Susanna, 1779 to 1798, Johannes George, 1781 to 1877, Philip, 1784 to 1833, John Adam, 1784 to 1833, Frederick, 1793 to 1867. On the front of the obelisk is Johannes, 1775 to 1860, John Philip, 1753 to 1779. Note, there are at least 26 Johannes Krauses, which makes it difficult to determine who was who. Also on the front of the obelisk is Jacob and Philip. And now I'm going to talk about what I titled this speech, The Pennsylvania Dutch Way. The first Johannes Kraus was born in Germany in 1712 and died in Heidelburg Township in 1795. In 1793, the Kraus family homestead was in Germansville. Johannes Conrad and his wife Maria had 10 children in 20 years. The Pennsylvania Dutch Way refers to the fact that the Krauses were very hard workers. They saved their money. They were wealthy in comparison to the rest of the population in the area, but they did not display their wealth. But when they wanted something, it was known that they would pay cash for a new car. But other than that, they lived very similar lives to the rest of the population in the Lehigh Valley. In 1799, John Kraus filed a petition in Orphans Court on behalf of his widowed mother, Margaret, and her 6 surviving children, George, Adam, Philip, Daniel, and Frederick. The plantation farm they lived on consisted of 2 contiguous tracts of land situated in Heidelburg Township, totaling 370 acres. And their children were Daniel Kraus Sr., Daniel Jr., husband was Daniel Kraus Sr., sons were Daniel Kraus Jr., daughter Maria, Catherine, Sally, sons Gideon, and daughter Fiesta. Jarius Kraus, another brother, was born March 1856 and died in 1921. He is buried on Heidelberg. And his children were Ralph and Blanche. His wife was Henrietta. And he was a farmer in Washington Township. His real estate value was $6,000 and his personal estate was $1,700, indicating Jarius was a very successful farmer. His brother Benjamin is also buried on Heidelberg. Jarius and his brother owned vast tracts of farmland, and they were known to be very wealthy. Daniel Kraus Sr. continued the farming occupation. Daniel Kraus Jr., who's also buried on Heidelberg, had Louisa, Owen, William, and Louis Daniel. He was a farmer. His real estate value in the 1870 census was $12,000. His personal estate was $1,500. He again was a very wealthy farmer. Louis Daniel Kraus was born January 21st, 1843, and he died in November of 1945. He is buried on Greenwood Cemetery in Allentown, which is adjacent to the Allentown Fairgrounds. And he was the son of Daniel Kraus Jr. and a grandson of the immigrant Johannes. Louis was the richest Kraus of all. He stayed on the farm till he was 15, and after that, he went into the retail business with William F. Moser, working in Moser's store in Slatington. He later worked for Frank Shenton in his store in Slatedale. And this is where Louis learned the retail store business. In 1860, Louis had taken his trade to Allentown, where he developed the largest shoe, boot, and rubber company in Lehigh County. which was the Klaus, CLAUSS, and Kraus, KRAUSE shoe store. The 1880 census lists him as a salesman in the Kraus Boot Shoes and Rubbers Company. He had a retail store at 848 Hamilton Street and a warehouse at 34 North 7th Street. This was the largest shoe and boot company in Lehigh County at this time. Lewis reportedly pioneered the door-to-door sales technique, and the 1920 census lists him as a banker and also a retail store owner. Lewis reportedly provided a lot of money for the precursor of what would become Merchants National Bank in Allentown. According to the 1930 census, he had a mansion at 1401 Hamilton Street valued at $75,000. Lewis became despondent over his family's situation due to his lack of heirs. None of his children, with the exception of his invalid daughter, survived to adulthood. His wife was Sarah. His children were Oliver, 1863 to 1866, Emma, 1866 to 1943. That was the invalid daughter. Charles, 1868 to 1871, and Samuel, 1872 to 1875. In 1906, Lewis became aware of the dire financial situation of the Schuylkill Seminary, located on the outskirts of Reading. On April 3rd, 1906, Lewis donated $20,000 to the seminary. This gift kept the seminary from going bankrupt. When Lewis passed away, he sold his business to his nephews. After Lewis's death, the bulk of his fortune went to the seminary. The exception was that he provided for his daughter for her lifetime, and the seminary became what we now know as Albright College in Reading. There's a Krause Hall dormitory on Albright's campus named in honor of Lewis's wife. The Slatedale Krauses. Johannes George Kistler was a wealthy landowner and farmer. It is rumored that he built the hotel on Main Street. He was involved with the grain mill. When the grain mill burned down, the knitting mill was built on its site. The money behind the mill was William B. Krause, who was the son of Jacob Krause. The brick house opposite the gas station outside of Slatedale is the Krause home. Johannes' son Elias became a store owner just down the street from the house. Elias was born in 1893 and died in 1951. He reportedly had all the children whose names started with an L. He became the owner of a store located between Grant and Main Streets, and the alley right there is known as Krause Alley. At one point, all of East Grant Street and most of Main Street in Slatedale was owned by the Krause family. They eventually sold individual lots for homes. Recent notable Krause people, we all know Krause from the Krause Toyota, Krause Honda businesses. Ronald Krause was born in March of 1933. He died in 2004. He is buried on Jerusalem Western Salisbury Cemetery. His father was Willard Lewis Krause, who started a gas station in Emmaus. Ron's father also sold used cars. When he retired, Ron and his wife Mary bought the father's service station in 1959 with a loan from New Tripoli Bank. Ronald owned and operated one of the first Honda motorcycle and car dealerships in the United States. He was a founding director of the former East Penn Bank and owner of the East Coast Dunlop racing tire business. Ron was renowned for his contribution to motorcycle racing and was one of the founders of the Keystone Motorcycle Club. In 1970, Ron operated the Krause Toyota dealership. And that's it.
I guess by now you're all tired of hearing about the name Johannes, so I'm going to mix things up and talk about Ulrich. The main subject of my presentation will be Joel Neff, to show one example of a member of a founding family who left Heidelburg Township, moved to Slatington, and ultimately helped the town and its slate industry prosper. But first I'll begin with the Neff family, who were one of the founding families of Heidelburg Township and played a role in the founding of this church. Ulrich Neff immigrated to Pennsylvania with a group of Swiss families aboard the ship Jamaica Galley on February 7th, 1739. Prior to his journey, he was a miller for his uncle Jacob Neff. He left in the winter from Rotterdam by way of Cowes in England, which was undoubtedly a rough journey at that time of year. These journeys to the New World often took a minimum of 6 weeks, and the conditions aboard the ships were often wretched. Immigrants had to endure cold, wet, cramped conditions, along with lice, scurvy, and other illnesses. Cowes on the Isle of Wight was an English seaport and was the first stop on English soil before crossing the Atlantic. Many ships loaded with German and Swiss passengers that left Rotterdam passed through there going to America, often with a destination of Philadelphia. Keep in mind that during this time, these passengers were going to become British subjects in colonial America, and the English captains made a written record of their stops in Cowes. Ulrich Neff was part of the second wave of immigrants to the township from Switzerland and Westphalia region of Germany, following the Peter brothers. Ulrich Neff was one of dozens of patriarchs who were granted land warrants in the township between 1743 and 1792. His initial warrant consisted of 147 acres in 1746. He subsequently procured additional warrants for a total of 374 acres. One of the first members of the church, Ulrich, along with many others, helped finance its construction. He also helped build the second church. Ulrich was baptized in Zell, Switzerland on June 25, 1709, after being born on April 5th. He died around 1778. Zell is one of 26 cantons known as states or districts in Switzerland. Ulrich married Elizabeth Ott, and together they had 7 children. 4 of Ulrich's sons, along with his brother Rudolf, served in the Revolutionary War. Ulrich Neff Jr., 1752 to 1799, has the oldest remaining Neff tombstone in the cemetery. Neff Jr. served in the Revolutionary War and was a veteran of the Heidelburg Militia. The Heidelburg Militia had 2 companies during this time, the 5th Company and the 7th Company, during 1777, 1780, and 1783, and were commanded by Captain Conrad Ritter and Captain John Crum during 1777, respectively. Bernhard Neff, 1735 to 1788, another son of Hans Ulrich, married Maria Magdalena Gressel. One of their children was Bernhard Neff Jr., 1764 to 1839. Bernhard Jr. married Anna Peter. Together they had 5 children, one being Johann George Neff. George had 2 sons, Edward and Joel, which I will speak about shortly. Bernhard was one of the committee members seeking the fee simple and lawful possession of the Heidelberg Church and school grounds after the second church was built. Members of the Reformed Church funded this purchase. Fee simple describes a landowner's complete and total ownership of a piece of land and all the properties on it, and allows them to do anything they wish to on the land. Bernhard Neff Jr. initially received 37¼ acres of land. He acquired more acreage in 1829 and conveyed 69 acres to his son George. George died in 1861, and in 1862 sons Joel and Edward received the land. Thus, most of the land, then owned by Edward and Joel Neff, was warranted land originally from June of 1746. It was conveyed through inheritance over several different families and generations. Abraham Neff, son of Bernhard Jr., spent his early years in the Germansville area, but eventually moved to North Whitehall Township, close to the Union Church, where he started an undertaker business and later a carriage factory. He laid out the village in 1840 that became his namesake, first Neffsville, and later changed to the name we know it by today, Neffs. In 1850, Abraham received the first hotel license in Neffs. He was a member of the Neffs Unionville Church. William Neff, son of Abraham, was born in 1870 in Neffs. After learning the baking trade in Allentown, he relocated to Slatington in 1893. There, after a short stint working in the slate industry until 1901, he became the proprietor of Neff's Restaurant and Ice Cream Parlor in Upper Main Street and became an ice cream manufacturer and dealer. William's ice cream business was described as a large trade in the wholesale ice cream business and supplied the upper end of Lehigh County with a superior product. Edward Neff, son of George Neff, ran the Arlington Hotel, Slatington, for 6 years, and the Neff House, the oldest licensed hotel in the borough on Upper Main Street. He also ran a livery business in connection with the hotel for many years. His son Oliver continued the family's livery business. Now on to Joel Neff, son of George Neff, was born here in the township on November 28, 1836. He spent his childhood in the township and received a common school education. The common school movement, 1840 to 1880, described a type of formal education, one that would be available to all citizens, developed and managed through increased governmental activity at the state level and supported by local property taxes. At the beginning of the movement, most children received little or no schooling. While still a youngster, Neff found work in a local slate quarry, where he completely learned the slate business. Because of his ambition, he leased quarry land and eventually bought a tract of land where he opened several quarries. He came to operate an extensive slate trade, owning valuable slate property, including the Washington and American quarries just on the outskirts of Slatington. The American quarry was started in 1864 by Thomas Kern and was valued at $150,000, which is equivalent to approximately $4.5 million today. Beginning in 1860, he was identified as a major player in the slate industry in Slatington. After acquiring these two quarries and making upgrades, the output was 10,000 squares of roofing slate a year, while employing 80 men. A square of slate is the amount of slate needed to cover 100 square feet of roof area. Thus, 10,000 squares equate to 1 million square feet of slate. In his biography, it was noted that Neff has a thorough knowledge of the business and its various details, and his long experience and executive ability have made him a prominent factor in the development in this most important industry. In 1871, Neff operated a large general merchandise store in connection with his slate business. Joel Neff later founded the Slatington Bangor Slate Syndicate. The syndicate was a consortium of approximately a dozen slate quarries and slate manufacturers in the Slatington area, as well as the Slate Belt region of Northampton County and even into Vermont. They especially concentrated on the export trade. One of the quarries that produced slate for the syndicate was the Blue Valley, which was known for its superior quality and at one time employed 50 men. The Blue Valley Quarry was located just to the east of the present-day northeast extension of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, approximately halfway between Welchtown Road and Mountain Road. For several years, Neff ran the syndicate himself, but in 1892, James L. Foote came on board to become manager of the syndicate, with Neff serving as treasurer. At one time, Neff owned a substantial portion of the vacant and residential property in Slatington. However, eventually Joel Neff ran into some financial trouble, and on April 7th, 1896, the Slate Syndicate Partnership was dissolved after an assignment was made. An assignment is an act of making a legal transfer of a right, property, or liability. The failure was considered one of the heaviest in the Lehigh Slate region. Judgments against Neff exceeded $80,000. The assignment was to Captain Frank Jacobs of Allentown and Neff's son Amandus for the benefit of his creditors. The assignment did not affect the syndicate, as Mr. Neff's stock alone was liable. The syndicate eventually reorganized under the sole tutelage of James Foote, who became general manager. Joel Neff was a Republican and always took an interest in the local and national affairs of his party. He served as Burgess of Slatington for 2 years in 1881 and 1883, and as a councilman for 4 terms between 1873 and 1880. He also had an interest in education and served on the school board for 6 years. Neff was also a longtime member of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows and was a past Grand of the Lodge. In 1859, Neff married Miss Drusilla Handwork, and she became mother of 3 children: William, who died as a toddler, Amandus Peter, and Serana J., wife of John F. Berkemeyer. Joel was a member of the German Reformed Church, and Drusilla a member of the Lutheran Evangelical Church. Joel F. died on June 30th in 1909 and was buried in the Union Cemetery, Slatington, and left behind a second wife, 2 children, 9 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Unbelievably, only a small article was published in the Slatington News at this time noting his death and announcing his funeral services, only calling Neff an old and respected citizen of town and making no mention of his legacy and accomplishments in Slatington's slate industry. But we know differently.
The history of the Peters family members who are buried in Heidelburg Cemetery goes back to an Ulrich Peter who was born about 1630 in a town near Zurich, Switzerland, and he and his wife Susanna Schupp had 7 children. Of their 7 children, one of them was Jacob Peter. He was born around 1661, and he married an Edelheit Nussel. And they had 7 children. And one of their 7 children was Caspar. Now Caspar was born in 1698, and he and his wife, who was Maria Zuppinger, they had 8 children, and 3 of whom were Jacob, Caspar, and Rudolph. So this is what we're zeroing in on. Caspar and his 3 sons, Jacob, Caspar, and Rudolph. And they all immigrated to America in 1731 on a ship called the Snow Luther. And they settled, of course, in Heidelburg Township. I could not find death or burial information about the parents, Caspar and Maria. However, all 3 of the sons and their wives have records that they are buried in Heidelburg Cemetery. None of the sons' tombstones remain, however. The only remaining tombstone from their generation is that of Anna Elizabeth Peter, one of the wives, 1724 to 1795. She was the wife of Caspar. And that tombstone is on the old cemetery where I would think all the others are buried. Now, a little bit of information about these 3 sons of Caspar. Jacob was born in 1722 and died in 1777. He owned land, as they all did, in Heidelburg Township, and he also owned land north of the Blue Mountain. He and his wife, Elizabeth Baer, had 5 sons and 6 daughters. As you can add, 11 total children. One of their daughters, also named Elizabeth, married Adam German of Heidelburg Township, and he was the first of that family, and I think we're going to hear about the German family, and you'll hear his name mentioned. A second son of Caspar was Caspar Jr. or the second. He wasn't known that, so he was known as Caspar. He was born in 1724 and died in 1795. He also owned large tracts of land in Heidelburg Township. He resided about 1 mile east of Heidelburg Church and built a house there in 1761 with the inscription on the wall, 1761 CP. He and his wife Elizabeth had 3 sons, Jacob, John, and Caspar. Now the 3rd son of Caspar was Rudolph Peter. He was born in 1730, died in 1777. Besides being a landowner and a farmer, he was also a hatter by trade. It is reported that he once bought a tract of land for 3 fine wool hats. He and his wife had 6 children. So that's about all I'm going to say about the lineage of the Peters family. Now a little bit more about their burials and their descendants. The surname Peter or Peters has the highest number of burials in Heidelburg Cemetery with 243. The next largest families are Handwerk and Rex. They have 127 and 121 respectively. So you can see it's almost twice as many as the next surname. Possibly this is because the Peters had 3 ancestors of that generation compared to other families with only 1 or 2 ancestors. And as we might expect, the Peterses intermarried with other early settlers such as German, Handwerk, Hunziker, Kraus, Rex, etc. As it was with many early settlers, the Peters descendants went on to be farmers, homemakers, doctors, educators, ministers, business people, laborers, servicemen, etc. I wrote down a few of the places and people that I associate with the name Peters in our area. Petersville, a village or town which is now Freeton's, and also that village exists in Lehigh Township. Peters School in Washington Township. Peters Foundry, again in Washington Township at Newside, where they made iron fire escapes, snow guards, and plows. The Peters Hotel here in Washington Township. The Butcher Peter Brothers Meats in Lenhardsville. Dr. Peters, a dentist in Slatington. Daisy Peters, who ran a store in Emerald. Shorty Peters, who had a beverage distributorship in Slatington. There was a large farm outside of Freeton's owned by the Peters called Sunnyland Farm. There was a Wilson Peters, who was a prominent landowner, and that was an owner of the Sagersville Slate Company, which operated several slate quarries just outside of Slakedale. And Reverend Neri Peters, who was a UCC pastor in Slatington. Thank you.
Much of the information in this presentation was found in both the History of Lehigh County, published in 1914, and in an article on the Rex family by Doris Rex Shute in National Genealogical Society Quarterly. Special thanks also go to Michelle LeClaire and Michael Gallagher, who are some of the best Rex family genealogists. The Rex family within Lehigh, Northampton, and Carbon counties traces its roots to the patriarch Hans Jörg Ruger, who later changed his name to Rex. He was a blacksmith by trade and a farmer out of practicality. He was born in what is today Germany on or around June 1682 and died in October 1772 and is buried at St. Michael's Evangelical Lutheran Church in Germantown, Philadelphia. I'm sure many of you are now thinking, how did a Philadelphian end up being a prominent patriarch in the Northern Lehigh County area? This presentation today will answer that question. By 1720, Rex made his way from Europe to the colony of Pennsylvania and purchased 27 acres on the road leading from Philadelphia to North Wales. After hanging around the southeastern corner of the state for 2 decades, George Rex was granted a patent for 400 acres on a branch of Trout Creek in Heidelburg Township, then Bucks County, in 1739. He purchased an additional 152 acres adjoining his property in Heidelburg Township 10 years later. At this time, Heidelburg Township in Bucks County, then Northampton County, and today Lehigh County, encompassed both Heidelburg and Washington Townships, along with the borough of Slatington and the villages of Slatedale, Emerald, Germansville, Newside, and Pleasant Corners. Additionally, Northern Lehigh County was the frontier at this point in our nation's history. It is hard to think of as true, but this fact is a reality since lands were still being deeded away from the natives. A number of skirmishes have been documented during these years. George Ruger Rex did not have property in Heidelburg Township long. Exactly 4 days later, he deeded half of his property to his son Bernhard Jacob and the other half to his son George. Each son received 276 acres. Other than another son Wilhelm, who also purchased land in what would become Northern Lehigh County, the remaining children, Christopher, John, Abraham, Jörg, Jacob, and Catherine, remained in Germantown, and their descendants generally stayed in that area. Therefore, the local Rex families can trace their lineage back to one of 3 sons, George, Wilhelm, and Bernhard Jacob. In Mike Huffman's case, he can trace his ancestry through both Wilhelm, father's side, and Bernhard Jacob, mom's side. George Rex, of the second generation, was born around 1720 and died before 1773. He was a blacksmith like his father and represented the Lutheran denomination when the Heidelburg Church was organized in 1740. He was also commissioned as a Justice of the Peace in 1757, and on March 1st, 1758, petitioned the government asking for protection from the Native Americans and recommended construction of a fort on the Blue Mountain. There were forts established in Lynn Township, Fort Everett, Slatington, Trucker's Mill, and north of Lehigh Gap, Lehigh Fort. However, the middle portion of Northern Lehigh County was not defensed. One of George Rex's most notable descendants is Leon Peter Rex Sr., who in 1915 owned one of the original Rex homesteads, along with many interesting family history artifacts. These old houses are located in the area of Christmas Lane, Old Mill Road, Best Station Road, Swamp Hollow Road in Washington Township. Wilhelm Rex, of the second generation, was born around 1721 and died in 1776. While he originally remained in Germantown, he did purchase land in Northampton County around 1753, relocating permanently to Heidelburg Township in 1758. Bernhard Jacob Rex, of the second generation, was born April 5th, 1724, and died April 24th, 1802 in Heidelburg Township. He is buried in the old cemetery at Heidelburg and served the 13 colonies in the Revolutionary War as a private from 1780 to 1782. His 276-acre deed that he gained from his parents encompassed part of today's Washington Township. The home that he built in 1752 is found on Christmas Lane and was still within the extended Rex family through 2008. To conclude the presentation, here are 4 more interesting tidbits on the greater Rex family. At least 12 of Hans-Jörg Rex's descendants served in the Revolutionary War. Other descendants in every major military conflict since the founding of our nation: War of 1812, Civil War, Spanish-American War, World Wars I and II, Korean War, and Vietnam War. When on a pigeon hunt in 1742 in March, Wilhelm Rex accidentally shot one of his hunting partners when he unloaded his gun. The victim, Abraham Deweese, died about a half hour after the incident. Stephen Rex, 3 times great-grandson of the patriarch, was known as the Cider King. He conducted a cider press near Fogelsville throughout the second half of the 19th century and was known far and wide for his high-quality product. Dennis Rex, 4 times great-grandson of the patriarch, who was accused to be a witch doctor, was tried by court in 1914. Rex was charged with an act for suppression of fortune-telling and similar purposes, and those who had gain of lucre pretend to effect any purpose by spells, charms, necromancy, or incantation. He was acquitted of all charges.
Are you ready? Good evening, my name is David Altrichter, and I have the privilege of being part of this Heidelburg Union Cemetery talk. Tonight I will be talking about Charles P. Stopp and his son. William P. Stopp was born October 28, 1909, in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania, the son of Sabbath and Sarah Stopp. As the youngest of 5 children, before school he would clean the Schnecksville bar, sweep the floors, and empty the trash. William rode the Lehigh Valley trolley to Slatington High School. After graduation, he set up his first barber shop in Allentown and worked at Bethlehem Steel. William married Anna Wessler Stopp and moved to Germansville in 1942. They became members of the Heidelburg Lutheran Church. During World War II, William joined the U.S. Army, serving as the 409th Artillery Division. During his time in the war, he cut many high-ranking officers' hairs. After the war, William was unable to return to Bethlehem Steel because of lack of transportation. After the war, William supported his family with a barber shop located behind the Germansville Hotel. On November 20th, 1949, a train whistle blew as their son Charles W. Stopp was born. Long before the days of Twitter and Facebook, if you wanted to know what was happening in your community, you went to the hairdresser, the barber shop, or the local tavern. William had a convenient place for his shop. His customers could wait and have a drink while they were waiting for their turn for the haircut. If the fire siren went while you were in the chair, William ran out the door up to the fire company because he was the fire chief for 15 years. For 10 years, he served the community as the Boy Scout Troop 66 Committee. At Northwestern Lehigh School, he drove the bus for 22 years and always had candy bars for the kids. William died May 1st, 2001, and was laid to rest in the Heidelburg Cemetery with full military honors. His son Charles W. Stopp was born November 20th, 1949 in Germansville, Pennsylvania. He was baptized and confirmed in the Heidelburg Lutheran Church. In high school, Charles competed in team sports, baseball, basketball, football, and wrestling, and graduated from Northwestern High School in 1966. During his years at Kutztown State College, or Norville School it was called when he went, Charles worked as a laborer with Rudolph Construction, laying pipelines in Pennsylvania and New Jersey during the summer. Frank Culp became one of Charlie's mentors. Charlie's aspirations of becoming a teacher were set aside when he joined the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. He served as Operations Intelligence Officer in Okinawa. While they were there, he formed a basketball team called the Uts. The cheerleaders called them the Utters. Charlie called them the Unsuccessful Draft Dodgers. After the war, Charles could not find a teaching job in Parkland, Northwestern, or Northern Lehigh. He used the GI Bill to advance his education at the Temple Law School. Charles married Barbara in this church in 1975. They had 2 children, David and Peter, and Charlie would always tell them before they went to school, don't forget what they have to remember. Barbara and Charles were blessed with 4 grandchildren. After law school, Charles worked for William A. Steckel in Slatington. The firm soon became known as Steckle and Stop. They served the borough, school district, and were legal counsel for many generations to the same family. Charles received many accolations and awards for his professional life and community service. Barbara and Charles are well-respected members of our community. He died March 28, 2021, and is buried at Heidelburg with full military honors. I remember Charles most, who was a friend, a kind, generous, and caring nature, but most of all, I remember him for his many simple acts of kindness.